Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Naomi, and today I want to share with you my top 2 tips for the pose that we know as Vasisthasana. Or actually, it's the pose that we know usually as side plank pose. I don't call it that though. I call it Vasisthasana because I think side plank is a little bit of a misnomer, and I'll explain why with tip number 1. Okay, so usually when Vasisthasana or side plank pose is taught, you are taught to enter this pose from plank pose, which is part of why it gets the name side plank. Let me show. Okay, so let's say you're in your plank pose, your teacher says, roll onto the outside edge of your right foot, stack one foot on top of the left, then extend your left arm up, right? Side plank, okay? The problem is that when I come into this pose from plank pose, it puts a lot more stress in my right arm, and it asks a lot more work of my upper body and my arm than it does with my legs. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but if you are newer to this pose, or if you have a shoulder injury or a wrist injury, or if just in general you're still trying to get your stability and your balance in Vasisthasana, coming into it from plank pose just asks a lot more of your body. Okay, it asks a lot more of your shoulder joint, and it asks a lot more of your strength. Okay, which again is totally fine if you've been doing the pose for a long time and you do it really skillfully. But if you are newer, it's going to ask a lot more of you. So my recommendation, my top tip, my first tip, is to come into Vasisthasana from downward facing dog instead. Let me show. Okay, so you're in your downward facing dog. You spin your heels to the right because you're going to balance on your right arm, and your hips stay really lifted, right? And your arm is at an angle as you lengthen, and you don't go directly shoulder over wrist, right? So there's a little bit of space there. Now this means that my legs are working a lot more. In fact, I'm squeezing them really tightly so I can keep my hips lifted, and then I can extend my left arm up. And although my arm is still really, really working, it's not working as hard as it does in plank. So again, I'll demonstrate. This is plank. If I just spin my heels, oh, look where my hips are, right? Look what happens to my feet and my legs. I tend to be sagging a little bit more, and now I've got to try to hoist them up and try to find more strength and balance. So in order to get your hips high up so that you're distributing your weight evenly from your arms to your legs, it's a lot harder once you're already down in that, kind of saggy side plank situation to lift your hips. So I'll just show one more time. You're in your downward facing dog. Spin your heels towards the right because that's the arm you're balancing on. My hips stay lifted, and I squeeze, and then I just give a little bit of length. So I'm not like all bunched up, lengthen a little, and there I am, Vasisthasana. And now I feel a lot more power in my body instead of more stress. Okay, so tip number 1, downward facing dog into Vasisthasana instead of plank into Vasisthasana. Now, tip number 2 is a little bit more about language, semantics, than it is about action, although it is about action as well. So one of the big cues that we usually hear going into Vasisthasana is come onto the outside edge of your foot. Well, do you know where the outside edge of your foot is? Like, do you do anything with the outside edge of your foot? I mean, it's right here, kind of, sort of. There's not much territory there, okay? So what happens usually when we say come into the outside edge of the foot is this. Okay, whether you come from dog or plank, it doesn't matter. But if I come to the outside edge of my foot, I'm trying to find it, and what usually happens is I roll onto my ankle instead, and then I'm in that same saggy side plank pose again that is uncomfortable and unsustainable, and it requires so much more work to get myself out of. Okay, so instead of saying come onto the outside edge of your foot, here's an alternative. It's a little bit more wordy, it's not as catchy, but you're going to spin your heels to the left, stack your right foot on top of your left foot, and press into the ball of your pinky toe and your inner heel, and try to get as much of your left foot to the floor as you can. You might not be able to, that's fine, but then you can stack your right foot on top of your left foot, and then my legs are really working as I extend my right arm up, and I feel so much more stable. My feet are actually helping hold me up. Whoa, instead of the opposite when I'm trying to get onto that outside edge of my foot. Okay, so words matter, right? Semantics, like what you say matters, particularly as a yoga teacher. So if you're watching this as a yoga teacher, my best advice to you as I recap is not necessarily to regurgitate the same things that you've heard your own teachers say over and over again, but instead really consider what it is you're trying to teach, right? Really consider what cues that you could use that might create more empowerment for your students, more understanding for your students, might give them more clarity. Okay, instead of just sort of like using that same language that you've heard so many times before, because the truth is that language works differently for everyone, right? So what one person understands is not necessarily going to be what the other person understands. So as teachers, part of our responsibility is to look for multiple different ways, in multiple ways to convey the same thing. Okay, so if you're a teacher watching this, what I want you to do is just take a few minutes to really think about how you describe Vasisthasana, getting into it, coming out of it, and think how much of that comes from your own experience and how much of that comes from what you've heard other teachers say. So it's a little bit of homework for you if you are watching this video and you are a teacher. So just to recap, my top two tips for Vasisthasana are to come into Vasisthasana from downward facing dog instead of from plank, and to change your language around how you spin your heels, right? How you get onto your feet. So instead of thinking that you're coming onto the outside edge of your foot, think more about positioning your feet in a way that anchors your bottom foot more so that your legs are working, okay? So no outside edge of the foot, but more like anchor through your foot. And that'll give you so much more strength in your legs. In fact, both will. So hopefully this has been really useful. I love Vasisthasana. It's one of my very favorite poses, and it's a pose that I'm going to be focusing on a lot this month in my Conscious Healthy Collective Yoga and Self-Care membership. So if you found this really useful and you want more like this, in fact, you want to go more in depth into Vasisthasana, I would love it if you would join me in the collective. It is free for the first 14 days, so you can spend those 14 days testing out as many of the classes as you want in my online yoga class library. There are 84 and counting while I'm recording this right now. There are classes that are 15 minutes long, there are classes that are 30 minutes long, and then I have a bunch of yoga pose tutorials, including one for this month, which is Vasisthasana. So instead of just getting my top 2 tips, you get all of my tips for Vasisthasana so that you can practice the pose with more skill and with more understanding, and that if you're a teacher, you can pass that understanding on to your students, which is, really why we're teachers in the first place, right? So if you're interested in checking out the collective, you can take a look at the information in the description below. Like I said, the first 14 days are free, and this month is going to be all about balance, not just Vasisthasana, but how we use our legs and our upper body to create more stability in all kinds of balancing poses. And maybe there'll be even airplanes involved. I don't know. Can you hear that airplane going overhead? Oh, the conflict of recording outdoors. Forgive me for that. Anyway, thanks for joining me today. I hope that this was useful. If you have any questions about the collective or about Vasisthasana or about anything else, please feel free to leave those comments below, and I hope to see you on the mat again really soon. Bye.